Hey everybody! So today I am going to talk about anti-Semitic tropes in media and with a focus on sci-fi fantasy. There are so many ways to create an anti-Semitic narrative and I can't possibly bring them all up I wanted to create a framework for you to work from yourself and for you to have these uh, building blocks that you can yourself work from and create your own understanding of anti-Semitism. It just overall has become a more secure and safe writing practice or reading practice, and you don't always have to ask someone else, is this anti-Semitic? And you can kind of determine that for yourself. Although if you are a writer, I really recommend getting sensitivity readers because it's crucial to get the perspective of the people in the group that you have included in your story. If there is a term or if there's a topic you want to know more about, just comment down below and I will either post a link to it or I can even create a new video if it's a topic that I feel like I am knowledgeable about or that I myself want to know more about. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Let's get to it.
What is anti-Semitism?
Anti-Semitism is a prejudice or hatred or discrimination against Jews, people who are perceived as Jews, or Judaism itself. And there are several different categories of anti-Semitism within the larger anti-Semitic label that work differently in society and have different definitions, but I'm just gonna go and work with the big one right now. Judaism is an ethno-religion, meaning Jews share both a religion and an ethnicity. We are a people both because of our religion, but also beyond it. Anti-Semitism presents itself in many ways, from violent attacks, snide remarks, expulsions, and anti-Jewish policies, to modern-day conspiracies such as the War on Christmas conspiracy, to QAnon extremism in the government. The QAnon lady, Marjorie Green, is one of these people. And then we have the internet forums joking about the New World Order or a lizard people and all these memes. But what I want to talk about today is the more subtle, more pervasive anti-Semitism that exists in media and that a lot of people don't pick up on because they have such a long history of existing that they have become mainstream and still live on today. And I also want to talk a bit about maybe how writers or creators can avoid it. The first trope that I wanted to talk about are villains. Yeah, you heard it right, villains as a whole. Anti-Semitic troping and coding has such a long history that it's almost indistinguishable from villainous characterization and character design. A lot of times I went to an art school and a lot of the character design that we were taught relied on anti-Semitic tropes and shaping futurism, etc. And it sounds ridiculous, right? You don't believe me. It's just how? But what if I told you that Disney, for example, only have about 4 or 5, maybe 6 maximum villains that do not rely on these tropes and do not use these shaping in their features at all? No. Here's one, here's one, here's several. There's so many of them, like you can't separate it. And also, Disney as a company has a very, very long history of anti-Semitism. They started creating media in the beginning of the 20th century and have had a lot of conservative propaganda against marginalized communities throughout the century. that has passed. But let's explore the traits a bit more, because me just saying there's traits is a bit up in the air. So I will read a list to you of traits that are usually used as anti-Semitic coding. And of course, just using one of these traits or two will not create an anti-Semitic image, but if you concoct them together into some big villainous cocktail, most likely you are creating an. Some common traits in coding are dark, curly, unruly hair, large hooked noses. They're oftentimes fat to indicate wealth or being lazy or sleazy. Then we have the beady eyes, fly eyes. They're usually dark circles, some kinds of beards, bushy or weird looking eyebrows, warts, hats, and more hats, be they round like the kippa or pointy like the Juden hat. They've always been there. Then we have the rubbing of hands together. If you search anti-Semitic propaganda, you will get a lot of hand rubbing. There's also the greedy Jew meme that is common on the internet that originates from anti-Jewish propaganda. It also ties into being greedy and stuff like that. Then we have treacherous, anti-nationalist, because the Jews were never tied down to one spot. They were often exposed, so they were always seen as a threat to society. Often random uses of Hebrew or Yiddish, and if not that, a very thick Eastern European accent or a Yiddish accent. And then compared to vermin, snakes, lizards, owls, and pigs. Hyenas is also kind of a red flag that not a lot of people know about. I will get to that in a bit and explain that a bit more. And then when it comes to fantasy elements and sci-fi elements, we have hidden horns, cleft feet, tails, reptilian features. Green, red, and blue skin are the most common in anti-Semitic propaganda, but also purple. And of course, these aren't inherently anti-Semitic, but if you combine them with a lot of the other elements that I mentioned before, there will be kind of this underlying history that you're perpetuating, and people who know about it will notice it. So I also just wanted to read a list of fictional villains that are coded as Jewish, and that's the Grinch, Mother Gothel, Hades, Water from Star Wars. He's even mentioned as a space Jew on the Trope Wikipedia. Harry Potter's Goblins, Snape, and the Dudleys. Roald Dahl's villain, most of them, yes, especially the witches. Then we have Magneto, Gru from Despicable Me, the Crumb family from Claus. There's also the other family. They're less coded as Jewish, but I think that the whole town kind of represents a Jewish slum. And then we have Barbie Swan Lake, Penguin from Harley Quinn animated series, and then also the Joker from the Batman animated series, the Big Bad Wolf in almost any adaptation, and also the original tale, Randall's family from Recess, Gargamel from the Smurfs, and so on and so on. These were mostly like children's media. I will also talk about some classics and other books that do have anti-Semitic villains coded as Jewish, but I just wanted to bring these up as I am going to talk about Mother Gothel and the villains from Swan Lake in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about Mother Gothel. So here I'm gonna post a picture of Mother Gothel, and as you can see, she has a lot of these features that I was talking about before, and let's just establish that Gothel is a very, very common Jewish last name. She's also the only character from Rapunzel to look the way she does, and especially in contrast to Rapunzel, this is not a good look. And especially due to the combination of all her traits and the lack of any other. She has everything from the unruly dark hair, the larger than Rapunzel's eyebrows, the aquiline nose, deep set eyes with very dark circles. Let's just say that Mother Gothel looks as alive as a dead person can look. I don't know, there's also something weird with her skin tone or something that always makes me feel like she's like kind of like beady or like, I don't know, greasy in comparison to other characters in the movie. And then we have other traits like being materialistic, a witch, morally corrupt, stealing not just children, but life force, and what is deemed as the most precious thing in the entire kingdom. Rapunzel is both child and treasure, all of which ties into blood libel, which I will be talking about later in this video. Then we also have the overbearing Jewish mother stereotype and how that ties into her song as well as her whole "I'm just protecting you" shtick. And another maybe not stereotype but rather conspiracy is that Jews are hiding their true selves. This stems from the Catholic Church's idea that Moses grew horns and therefore all Jews had horns hidden in their hair and on their hats. Today we can see this in like lizard people stereotypes and conspiracies, and also it also stems from a lot of like bestiaries in medieval times saying that Jews would shift their selves, oftentimes their genitalia or age or physical presentation between animal and human, a lot of other things as well. And Mother Gothel changes her appearance when she does not get Rapunzel's life force, creating this very dependent relationship between them that she somehow needs Rapunzel's magic and her pureness. So yeah, if you're already starting to kind of connect the dots between Mother Gothel's presentation and her tropiness and coding, you will see that she has a lot of similarities to the evil queen in Snow White, and you are not the only one. There are a lot of Disney geeks out there who actually believe them to be the same person, but at different stages in life. This is not true, but both of them come from the same tale collection from the Brothers Grimm, and both of their anti-Semitic coding also comes from there. The Brothers Grimm have not written out that these two characters are Jewish, but a lot of their other villains, or maybe not villains, but their unfortunate characters are Jewish, and oftentimes their name is only the Jew. They are often thieves or slaves. And to bring up another villain pair, I'm going to talk about Swan Lake, mainly Barbie's Swan Lake, because that's the one I am the most familiar with. It's been a while since I watched any other adaptation or the source material of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. But the villains are Rothbart and his daughter Odile. They work together as a pair, but also one by one, and this ties into the Jewish villain and his La Belle Juive, aka the beautiful Jewess, who was usually the Jewish villain's daughter. This trope dates back to The Merchant of Venice, if not further. I've heard that there is a Jewish villain in The Jew of Malta, but let's talk about Odile first. Although in the adaptations or the Barbie adaptation, she is not really that beautiful, she does fulfill a lot of the other roles of the beautiful Jewess, and she becomes beautiful both in this adaptation but also the Swan Princess adaptation through being transformed into Odette. The beautiful Jewess is usually a beautiful Jewish woman who enjoys pleasure, has a very present sexuality. The myth of La Belle Juive comes from Christianity and how Jewish women were perceived to be temptation and representing sin. They were rebellion of young Christian men. They were sex, riches, and good food. Many texts even describe them as the downfall of European imperialism. God, I wish. But we can all agree that Odile is a little. Even though the beautiful Jewess belongs to her father in these tropes, if she has one, she does long for freedom. Odile's freedom lay in courting the prince in both source material and adaptation. For when the Jewish villain represents seclusion and the resistance to assimilate into Christian society, the beautiful Jewess represents the Orient that does assimilate and becomes a part of Christian society. The beautiful Jewess's freedom lay in her Christian lover and their relationship. And to talk a bit about the tropes I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Odile falls into a lot of them. She has very weird, sticky, unruly black hair. Her eyebrows may not be bushy, but they are at a 75-degree angle, and she is greedy, she is vain. Not only that, she is also turned into a pig as punishment, and this feels very important to note because Jews were often compared to pigs, but pigs are also not seen as a clean animal in Judaism. It is not kosher. We aren't allowed to eat it, stuff like that. So it's just very bad. And if we move on to Rothbart, you will see that he also have a lot of these features and tropes that I described at the beginning. And I think he has the largest nose that I have ever seen in any animated movie. It is probably supposed to look like the beak he has when he is an eagle, I think he's supposed to be. Rothbart is also inspired by the trope of the Jewish villain. The Jewish villain is a character that rejects the rest of society and often enters a self-imposed exile, and this exile is usually somehow a self-imposed exile to their own ghetto-like land or place away from Christian society. The Jewish villain is also often described as greasy or dirty in numerous ways, and I think we can see this in his portrayal because both him and Odile has these costumes that look like they're made from like rotten fruits and vegetables, and Odile have these like corn leaves sticking out of her shoulders, and everything just kind of looks rotten. There's a quote I'm gonna read now about the Jewish villain that I think is very important. In the 19th century, the ghetto was synonymous with decay and darkness. In other words, a kingdom of death to which the Jewish villain belongs to. I can really see this in the portrayal of his house, everything, just like his clothes look rotten or just like falling apart. There's a lot of scavenger animals there, crows, ravens, rats, I think, worms. And it is incredibly important to note that the Jewish villain's dehumanization and exclusion from humanity is reducing him to an animal. And this is very important because Rothbart and Odile both transform between animal form and human form, which furthers dehumanize them. In the original Tchaikovsky play, Rothbart is an owl, and according to medieval bestiaries, the owl represents Jews. Some bestiaries even write this out right. One example is the Aberdeen bestiary, and I will read some quotes from there to really nail this point in so you guys don't think I'm overselling this or something, because it is really just explicitly out there. This bird symbolizes the Jews who, when the Lord our Savior came to save them, rejected him. It also reads, Isidore says of the owl, the name owl, bubo, is formed from the sound it makes. It is a bird associated with the dead, weighed down, indeed, by its plumage, but forever hindered, too, by the weight of its slothfulness. It lives day and night around burial places and is always found in caves. And how do you get to the magical forest? Through a cave. And Rothbart wanted to become the king of this place. He wanted to become a king of the ghetto away from Christian society. And some classics that include the Jewish villain and or the beautiful Jewess are The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, Ibano by Sir Walter Scott. He's the father of Rebecca, is a Jewish moneylender, and Sir Walter Scott argues in the book that his greed has historical reasons. Mayor Wolfsheim in The Great Gatsby is a gambler with stereotypical features and is described as alien and not fit for America as Thomas. Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander, Dracula, the Jew of Malta by Marlowe, and Salome by Oscar Wilde. And then comes the question, but how can I write a villain if they're not allowed to have these traits? Well, you are allowed to use these traits sparingly. Look to real people instead of looking to tropes. Don't make a super cocktail of stereotype villain, because more often than not, you will enter the realm of anti-Semitism or racism, misogyny, all these things that have lived on and is still present in society. And you will also oftentimes border on creating propaganda instead of good media and creating a good authentic villain. A captivating villain should not be a villain first and character second. It is a character that should be multifaceted. I need to breathe before saying this, because Nazi romance. This trope I really wish to see die. I don't like it. It makes me sick. I will look the other way if a Jewish person or a person of color uses this trope, if it's in a good way. Otherwise, I don't want to see it, honestly. The Nazi romance is a trope where a Nazi character or a character holding a position similar to a Nazi shows affection to or is the love interest of a Jewish inspired or a person who holds the same power position in the novel as a Jew would in Nazi Germany. Often this trope includes the Nazi learning that actually it's not good to kill and genocide your love interest's family and whole people and culture, as if that's something you need to learn. More often than not, the Nazi character has actually tried to kill the love interest on either one or multiple occasions. It usually ends with the big decision of leaving the Nazis for their love interest and somehow becoming the savior or a big advocate for this group. Or hear ye! It is revealed that this character that was once a Nazi is actually part of the marginalized group they were trying to kill, and now they share the same trauma and history as the marginalized character. Or do they actually? Or is this just apologist propaganda? Not only does the Nazi trope romanticize and fetishize Jewish and people of color's trauma, it also normalizes and romanticizes Nazis. It also trivializes the experiences of the victims of the Holocaust or instances of similar experience. The Nazi trope at its core is abusive because the two characters hold such a different power position in the relationship. One person will always be at a disadvantage. They will always actually be fearing for their life, or they should be.
They should be.
It is a savior story that does not actually usually, not at all, uh, even breach the topic of accountability for the Nazis' actions. It utilizes the love conquers all trope to strip and absolve the Nazi of their crimes, as if their relationship does not need to address these things, and it is usually put as a relationship issue instead of crimes against humanity. It also puts the responsibility onto the marginalized character to teach and educate the Nazi that their people are actually human, or should be viewed with like human values. Personally, I would never be together with someone who still advocated the death of my people, and probably usually even did kill my people or even my own family or my friends. I know that many marginalized authors do use this trope as self-indulgence or coping mechanism, but honestly I wanted to see new spins on this trope that actually handles it kind of well, instead of just rehashing the whole love conquers all narrative. And if you're a white Gentile or Gaja, just don't touch this trope at all is honestly my recommendation. Don't touch it at all. Why are you writing this? Why would you need to write this? What is so compelling to you about this trope? Why do you want to write about someone else's misery and someone else's unequal power structures in a relationship that you will never experience? Unless you are a Nazi and you want to be redeemed of all your past crimes. I also feel the need to clarify that this is not enemies to lovers. Enemies to lovers, it shouldn't be, at least, because enemies to lovers is when you overcome your differences, and being a Nazi is not something you overcome. I also kind of want to breach the topic of the Spanish Inquisition, witch trials, World War II, and race wars in fantasy. I've noticed a lot of fantasy and sci-fi do use race wars and things similar to it in the premise, putting races against each other, and this feels both kind of new-ish but also very old, and I feel like it's becoming more common. These events usually overlap with each other. The Spanish Inquisition overlaps with the witch trials and is basically what happened before and leading up to World War II and the Red Scare. All these historical events are very linked, even though on surface level they may not look like it, because they have purged most of their history from being attached to these people, or people will detach them from these people and attach them to the perpetrators instead. So I just feel like the Spanish Inquisition is something that a lot of people have heard about, but they don't actually know what it entailed and what actually happened. It is an event that has been used extensively in media, video games, TV series, movies, books, everything basically, and as cultural reference in daily life. So I will leave some links down below in the description if you need to read up on the actual events that happened and in depth. Short version is that the monarchy and the church wanted to establish their power in 1478 and forward, and they did so through brutal means. They sought to weed out heretics and people who had converted from Judaism and Islam to Christianity because they were seen as not Christians. Ultimately, it expulsed Muslims and Jews, tortured, murdered, and otherwise persecuted them. And this happened to people who were seen as enemies of Spain, both the church and the state. This took place across all Spanish territories, so even in colonized territories this happened. The Spanish Inquisition was actually not officially called off until the late 19th century, and thus just kind of ends where the new kind of anti-Semitism was born. I am not going to say that writing things inspired by these events are anti-Semitic or racist, but I've seen a lot of writing or media that does portray these events in very offensive, very revisionist ways that remove Jews and Muslims from the narrative and ultimately forces a white narrative with white on white conflict, where this was not the case at all. And there's also more of that with the Roma and with, for example, Eastern Europeans being driven out of Western European countries, and also there's a lot going on. Focus on anti-Semitism, Noah. Focus on anti-Semitism. Don't lose your grip. Also, this does not mean that tales between light and dark, good and evil are anti-Semitic. These stories have always existed across cultures, but a lot of Western sci-fi and fantasy wars and conflicts are just race science to me, blood contents, dehumanization, etc. Because when you use allegories to actual race wars and conflicts where race and ethnicity are crucial, or switch out either the oppressed or the oppressor to non-humans, you are implying that race is an actual tangible thing and not a social construct, that these creatures are physically different from humans, and they are to either represent those who have already been subjected to racification and dehumanization, or those who believe themselves superior. So if you're giving them superior traits...
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Just be careful. It's better to draw on historical conflicts that don't center a race. Come up with something on your own. There are a lot of class differences or class wars, religious wars between denominations instead of religions, like the Protestant versus Catholic war. There's definitely a lot of erasure when it comes to different ethnicities in European-inspired fantasy. For example, not even the Vikings were one definite race. There were a lot of people of color who were Vikings, who had encountered them when the Vikings went on their expeditions and came back with them, or just traveled, like how the Vikings traveled somewhere else, others traveled to the Nordic region, and similar, like it wasn't as common or in as broad as it is today with multiculturalism and stuff like that, but they did exist, and erasing these perspectives and narratives just creates a white supremacist revisionist narrative. So yeah, creating an ethnically pure Europe is super harmful, actually, and not at all true. And a lot of people are like, well, it's fantasy, I can make it whatever I want. Yeah, you can make it whatever you want, but do you want it to be revisionist and racist? So, blood libel. The origin of this anti-Semitic trope, theory, stereotype, canard, has its origins in the Easter story of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The Romans spread propaganda and allegations against the Jews that they were the ones responsible for Jesus' death. The Romans claimed the Jews had killed him to use his blood in heretic rituals because they did not want to be at odds with the Christian population. Jesus Christ was seen as the divine child, and thus the myth that Jews stole and drank the blood of Christian children was born. Jewish persecution and allegations of blood libel has always been the most common around both Christmas and Easter, as those are the birth and death of Jesus. And many Christians would actually end their Sunday service with picking up pitchforks, maybe not exactly pitchforks, but things similar to pitchforks, and go out and perform pogroms against the Jewish population in their town. What a wholesome tradition! Yay! And still to this day, anti-Semitic violence and attacks are the most common around Christmas and Easter, and they still live on today. And blood libel accusations have not gone anywhere. They actually just happened like a week ago since I created this video. So that's just something to think about. In 2021, people think Jews drink the blood of Christian babes. In medieval times, in the region that is now Germany, there was this belief that blood possessed the power to heal or to cause injury. There were also accusations of Jews going for nightly blood hunts where they would try to gain blood through either grave robbings or stealing of children to use in ritualistic killings. And along with the blood libel also came the accusations of buying and stealing children, whom the Christian church would claim were holy in some sense and therefore stolen to be crucified by the Jews. And past the 17th century and onward, blood libel cases were the most common in Eastern Europe. Jews would be tortured until they admitted to it or they died. And I mentioned earlier that bestiaries were used, and where they wrote down, for example, that owls represented Jews. Well, owls were not the only animal to be used in this way. Hyenas were as well, and most scavenger animals. Hyenas were said to dwell in graveyards and eat the corpses of the dead. They were seen as filthy creatures, and often bestiaries told tales of how they changed their appearance, usually their sex, and their genitals would be very, very detailed in pictures. They would look very kind of bloody and grotesque, and this just ties into the whole Jews could change who they were, but they were also sexually deviant in some kind of way, just bad overall. That they were deceitful. Like the owl, hyenas were seen as nocturnal animals, emphasizing their darkness, and like the owl, their aversion to the light and the Lord. In medieval bestiaries, the hyena was also put in opposition to the lion, the lordly, triumphant ruler. Although in real life, lions also hunt during the night, they were portrayed as being a creature of the day. How we look at hyenas and lions may just be Christian propaganda. Because of the long history of blood libel accusations against Jews, both in and out of animalistic forms, it is crucial and very, very important to be aware of and deliberate while writing vampires, sorcerers, and werecreatures, and make sure not to perpetuate a harmful stereotype, because all of these creatures in Western lore ties back into anti-Semitism. So during the Black Death, Jews were accused of poisoning wells and spreading the deceased deliberately. There had been high levels of persecution of Jews prior to the bubonic plague, but during the Black Death, it skyrocketed. Jews were submitted to economic oppression, unfair taxing, and made to wear yellow and purple patches. They were made to wear yellow and purple patches. Jewish property was seen as belonging to royalty, cities, or the nation. Jews had to work under license and were mostly only permitted to do trade or money lending businesses because Christians looked down upon these professions, because handling money was seen as ungodly and unchristian, and Jews were also seen as not being human or not being Christian, and therefore they were not held to these rules of Christian, like, purity. Like, they could do all the dirty work. And with many plague outbreaks came economic instability and crisis. People, communities, and even kingdoms felt that if they could blame the Jews for the plague, they could seize their property and divide it amongst themselves, and thus many mass killings either happened or were administered by governing rulers upon the Jews, and the Jews were burned to death. Many historical books, many historical fiction books and fantasy and sci-fi utilizes the bubonic plague or a setting that is during the bubonic plague, but there's no mention of Jews whatsoever, like none at all. It's not realistic whatsoever. It's just revisionism, because their persecution was such a key piece to how many people got through the plague or actually didn't survive the plague, and how communities. Goblins and Trolls. I spoke a bit about Werecreatures and vampires during the whole blood libel thing, but I also wanted to bring up Goblins and Trolls. Trolls and goblins aren't some kind of modern creation for D&D or by Tolkien. They have existed in folklore for centuries, and they weren't just like some kind of folk tale that you just told your pal, like, whoa, look at this troll, aren't they cool? This is a little like ghost story-esque thing that I heard about this green little monster that was sitting in a well. No, folk tales were usually used in communities where literacy and the knowledge about laws weren't that common. They positioned morals into folk tales that they hammered into children, that they said then would bring into adulthood with them, about who and what you are supposed to be. Trolls were this society. I'm talking about Swedish culture here because there's so many different versions of trolls, but I'm Swedish, so I'm gonna talk about the one I know the best. So Swedish trolls were a society set up. Why did I speak British? So Swedish trolls were a society set apart from the Christian society. They lived in mountains, in caves, away from the light of the Lord. They too kind of were nocturnal. A lot of troll creatures like the tomte, and other creatures would only come out at night or live in dark forests. And these societies were actually kind of advanced, I guess. Like not human advanced, but they were like, they had like kingdoms within their little cave like structures, and they were greedy little bitches. They collected gold, they wanted riches, they had massive thrones that they were sitting upon. they stole children, especially Christian children, because they would have very, very pretty hair and very, very fair skin and nice, pretty, clean skin and nice bodies and pretty eyes. And there's actually this Swedish children's book that is very, very popular. It is a collection of tales. It's an anthology on folk tales and fairy tales that nearly every Swedish child has read, because it is given to children at the age of 6 for free by the Swedish library. And it actually describes word by word how when the Christians found the troll children, because the trolls would exchange their children for the human children, and when the humans woke up the next day and they saw these children that were trolls in the nursery, they would have dark skin, they would have curly, unruly black hair, and they would have very, very dark, ominous eyes. The whole changeling thing was to make it okay in the eyes of Christianity to kill these children that were usually either disabled or disfigured children, or they were children who were born out of wedlock, oftentimes maybe mixed children that they did not want to claim. And there's just, let's call it kind of like early stages eugenics. And trolls and stuff were like seen as deception, like deceptive, and also like very sexual. A lot of stereotypes you have seen, like if you look at a troll drawing and then you look at, for example, like Jewish propaganda, you will see similarities. So I just wanted to bring that up. Again, use trolls and other creatures with caution. During medieval times, Jews were said to be the children of devil, and that they had given up their souls to him in exchange for power. Woo! The blood libel belief carried on, and it was believed that ritualistic killings of Christians now were sacrifices to Satan. During heretic evening meetings, Christians like to call the Sabbath. Hold up. Let's just clarify something once again for those that aren't very knowledgeable about Judaism. The Sabbath, which is Sabbath, is actually a bastardization of the Jewish Shabbat. The rest day, the 7th day of the Jewish week, that is observed between sunset on Fridays until sunset on Saturdays every week. It's kind of a Jewish holiday, I guess. We do like observe it and celebrate it, even if it's very recurrent. It's not like just like being off for the weekend. It's like a thing, very exciting, cool. So yeah, Shabbat. That Shabbat was used as becoming this like witches gathering for sacrificing to the devil, and Jews were often, as I said before, portrayed with having clawed feet, goat legs, hidden horns. And again, when it comes to portrayal of witches and anti-Semitism, there needs to be a distinction between Western cultures and non-Western cultures, because there are sorcerers, magic wielders, shamans, healers, and spiritual elders in nearly every culture and society on the planet. And most do not share the same anti-Semitic history as the Europeans have. And if they do share some of these beliefs, it is probably because they have been colonized by Christians and have had a lot of pilgrimage to the area, and therefore some Christian beliefs have transferred. And during the Middle Ages, a lot of the blood libel myths started to spread onto other heretical groups, non-Christian. The Juden hut is something I really want to speak about, because we all know the little witch hats, the pointy hats, you know? So there's this hat that became mandatory for Jews in the 1200s to wear. It was actually optional to wear it long before that. It was something done by Jews probably like at least 500 years before this. But in the 1200s, Christians demanded that Jews in certain areas would wear these hats to distinguish them as Jews, and they were like cone shaped. And I'm gonna show you two images of these hats that are two paintings. Here we have one painting, very pretty. In the back stands a man with his little beard and his very pretty white cone-shaped Judenhut. Judenhut means Jewish hat. So he's there. He's very cute. I like him. And then we have this image that is a lot more grim. They don't look that happy, but they're also wearing this hat. And I think that this may be the inspiration for the witch hat. I don't really know where else the inspiration for the witch hat would come from, but a lot of people say it's just speculation. I couldn't really find any source that actually said that there was evidence for this, and with evidence I mean someone actually writing it out. Historical witches, like the medieval witch, is usually what people draw upon when they accidentally or deliberately create an anti-Semitic narrative. But I also kind of wanted to speak about modern witchcraft a bit too. And I really hope that if you are Wiccan or like a modern pagan, you will kind of like just sit down and listen. I know that me and a lot of my friends have gotten a lot of backlash when we've spoken up about cultural appropriation within both Wicca and Neo Paganism. So please just be respectful and listen. And like, this isn't a personal attack on you or your beliefs. It's just like there's a lot of history and a lot of cultural appropriation that needs to be talked about, and a lot of fantasy and like urban fantasy or sci-fi uses like neo-paganism and Wicca to create like modern cultures of witchcraft and stuff like that. So I just like wanted to mention it a bit. As I said, like Wicca has a history of cultural appropriation, or well, it was founded on cultural appropriation. Please read up a bit about that history if you're gonna use it, because like a lot of cultures were appropriated. Romani people's culture, Jewish people's culture, Native people, Black culture, a lot of like marginalized cultures were just like put into a mixing bowl together with like Greek mythology, and just like were made into this like hot pot of beliefs and rewritten basically. It is its own belief now, but I really like hope to see maybe a more aware practice. Just be aware. That's all I'm asking. Then we have white neo-paganism. Has a lot of its own issues. And when I say white neo-paganism, I specifically mean white neo-paganism, because there's a lot of like neo-paganism within marginalized communities, like for example like Jewish witches and things like that, specifically white neo-paganism. And a lot of white neo-paganism is drawing inspiration from actual white nationalism and white nationalist beliefs. The people who started these pagan belief systems, or well, eclectic practices and like polytheistic paganism and stuff like that, where originally, like, usually they're previous Christians or Christian atheists who are creating something new while also using a Christian framework and understanding of religion. A lot of like the movements that sprung up around the 1800s and 1900s in neo-paganism were actually white supremacist movements that wanted to cleanse the like folklore and the beliefs in the region and revitalize the like nationalist spirit, the ethno-nation, using old beliefs from the region and excluding everybody else. It usually utilizes anti-Semitic or anti-Roma sentiment. It's detrimental to understand the movement you're using, the history and often political alignment of the movement where the beliefs stem from, to not dive in the deep end of anti-Semitism and anti-Roma sentiment. And I really recommend to like try to find the like folklore and the myths that existed before these movements, because they will usually be, well, not free of, but they will usually not have the same political alignment, and you can usually try to like weed out what they try to like spin into white nationalism instead of just the like folklore of the people. A lot of like practices are infringing on marginalized and closed cultures or relying on Christian hegemony and anti-Semitism and white supremacy. And that's just the way it is. Like Lilith is another element that has kind of been like appropriated. Many will probably be shocked to hear this, but Lilith doesn't exist in any other Abrahamic religion than Judaism. It is a Jewish text by Ben Sira where she is portrayed as the first wife of Adam, and she rejects both him and God, and then later becomes the mother of demons and the eater of Jewish babes. And this is the portrayal that is mostly common used in paganism or Christian literature, for example, and due to the reclamation of Lilith as a feminist character in the 70s by Jewish feminists, maybe she became a piece of popular culture then. I don't know. I'm still really not sure how it like she became popular culture. Like I just feel like maybe Christians were desperate to give the devil a wife because heterosexual society needed the devil to have a wife for some reason, because they are sexual beings and they need to have sex and indulge in stuff. I don't know. I honestly have no clue, but she's Jewish. She has kind of been reduced to this whole ooh sexy lady thing and conflated with a lot of like Wiccan goddess of the moon and queen of night, and also like Nyx from the Greek mythos. Well, she's not at all like them. Lilith is not the only thing about like Jewish mysticism that has been appropriated. Kabbalah is another thing. It is Jewish mysticism and kind of like a Jewish, not magical practice, but like that may be the like easiest way to describe it, maybe for people to understand maybe what it is. It is kind of the teachings of the universe and how the universe works. It is in addition, it's like trying to understand God's power and God and all of that. Oh my god, I've said his name so many times in this video. I'm sorry. It's stressing me out. Kabbalah is a practice and a teaching that only the most knowledgeable of Jewish scholars or Jews will get to practice or will practice. Kind of, some will either way, but like it's kind of hard to explain. In Judaism, there's kind of this belief that we pursue different levels of understanding of our texts at different points in life and at different ages, or when we've actually seen that someone has like understood it at that level. Many Jews just have this kind of like cultural agreed upon age that we do things, even if it's not like a rule, like you won't die if you do it. But it is reliant on a deep understanding of Jewish texts and culture. Kabbalah has been appropriated in many ways. A lot of Christian celebrities are practicing Kabbalah. Ariana Grande and Madonna are two of them, and so are some pagans trying to incorporate it into their eclecticism. It just kind of makes me bewildered because it's so rooted in Judaism to me. Like, how can they not be Jewish and practice Kabbalah? It just doesn't make any sense for me. Kabbalah has also been used widely in literature, TV, and conspiracy theories. It is probably the most common in video games from what I can find. The Witcher, Persona, and Final Fantasy are all game franchises that utilize and borrow heavily from Kabbalah. There's also way more, but those were like the most popular ones, according to me. A lot of cultural Christians view Judaism as some sort of like proto-Christian culture, and that everything in Judaism is up for grabs for Christians to incorporate. That Judaism is some kind of like dead culture and Hebrew is a dead language. That's not the case at all. A whole country speaks Hebrew. Even outside of Israel, Jews use Hebrew during services, during prayer on Shabbat, in songs and art. It is a living and evolving language. Our stories and myths are a big part of our culture. I need people to understand that Judaism is a closed culture. It's closed, like only for Jews. You can convert, but then you're a Jew. So like, it is not appreciated if you use Judaic things and like misappropriate our stuff. This belief that Judaism is dead in combination with anti-Semitism probably make up for a lot of appropriation and misuse of Jewish culture of things. One thing I've seen a lot is the usage of Yiddish and Hebrew as mystical languages. For example, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Umbrella Academy, Hades and Phil and Hercules uses Yiddish phrases. Hades is kind of a devil character, and Phil, well, he has goat legs and cleft feet and horns, and I'll just leave it at that. And then we have the Joker in the back. I just also kind of wanted to note that Jews are often reduced to stereotypical Jewish features, and this is definitely a product of ethno-nationalism and heavy stereotyping of Jews. But there are Jews of all kinds, different nationalities, ethnic mixes, and races. There's also different denominations within Judaism and subgroups of Jews all around the world. If your fantasy Europe only has one kind of Jew, and it's the stereotypical Jew, just don't. Let's talk a bit about nationalism and white supremacy and how it has had a key part in anti-Semitism, especially during and after imperialism and the rise of the nationalist ethno-state. Not that imperialism actually ended. The emancipation of Jews in the 19th century was very positive in many ways. Jews were able to own property, take jobs that has previously been reserved for Christians, etc. Although Jews became kind of hyper visible in European society, and this birthed a new kind of anti-Semitism. This was during the same time as nationalism and essentialist ideas was truly on the rise and prospering throughout Europe. Jews entered many forward-thinking jobs like banking, arts, journalism, medicine, and law. They had never been part of society before, and they didn't have the same outlook on these professions as many Christians did. These professions were not really like the biggest ones you wanted to have. A lot of them didn't really look too favorably on these professions, but there were also many Jews who felt left behind, that did not keep up with becoming a part of society. They had not been a part of society for hundreds of years. And now they were thrust into this industrial machine that they had to learn the rules of, and they were treated like shit. A lot of people, like not everybody, could become like high standing people in society. Like society didn't live up to what many Jews had imagined, and they wanted to better society through politics, and they entered politics. Jews entered the whole spectrum of politics, but were the most prominent and present the left side axis of the political spectrum. Why am I bringing up these new things, and what relevance do they have to the topic at hand of like fantasy and sci-fi? Well, there's a lot of like politics and stuff in fantasy and sci-fi world building, and also like how we frame ideologies is very important. Personally, I've noticed a tendency to frame villains as having leftist beliefs, often anti-nationalist or anti-capitalist ideals. Only usually they're just like leftist ideology plus extreme violence to make them very, very, very violent and very, very horrible people for killing all these people. And it doesn't really line up with the actual ideology, but is only there to demonize it. Then we also have the whole thing about like taking fascism and just making it fascism and then like putting another label on it. It's very common to put the anarchist label on fascism and also like socialism on fascism, because maybe the author thinks that's what what socialism is. They think it's fascism because the Red Scare and US propaganda in schools have taught you that. But it's actually not. And this kind of renders the ideologies used in the writing and the world building to propaganda and rather hollow and nonsensical. They don't make any sense if you go into it. By doing this, the creator is doing themselves and their work a disservice. Well, unless they're aiming for propaganda, because, well then, kudos. This is not inherently anti-Semitic. Not all leftists are Jews. Not all Jews are leftists. But it's just like kind of important to note what you're doing with your politics and where you're placing people and different ethnicities in your political alignments within your work. And what I talked about previously about political alignment birthed two new tropes. One is the merchant reborn, the Jewish villain with a new coat and a trunk of newly made money, the Jewish upstart. Similar to the beautiful Jewess, the Jewish upstart adorns himself with jewels and gold and fancy clothing, but not with the same aim at all. His is to shine in society and impress everyone, and of course to hide his internal darkness. He is a very damaged soul. The Jewish upstart symbolizes the breaking free of the ghetto, but in a greedy way, intent on breaking the white nation. He transforms new buildings with his new money and new ideas, a threat to old traditions and who already are in society. He's a threat to the old and apparently the poor, and just a threat to everyone who is white but unfortunate. The upstart is metropolitanism, the counterpart and opposition to the 19th century nationalism and essentialism. This trope is too common for me to even give one example. Pick a fantasy or historical media and you will be sure to find some previously poor man who is too modern and too extravagant and too cocky for his own good and will probably shoot himself in the foot because of it, or everybody views him as a threat. The beautiful Jewess, La Belle Juive, also became more common during this period of time, and I did mention her before, but there's one facet to the beautiful Jewess that I did not mention because it didn't apply to Odile before, and I will read this kind of longer quote from a source that I found that I thought really nailed this and what the new beautiful Jewess stands for. In longing for love, the beautiful Jewess is doomed to lose her identity. The only way to belong to her Christian lover in Christian society is to convert to Christianity and reject her Jewishness. Both her love for her father and then her Christian lover require her self-sacrifice. Thus, she loses herself in the quest for love, torn between Eros and Familia, like the heroine of a Greek tragedy. Her destiny can only end in madness, suicide, or death. Arguably, writers use her story to cast doubt on successful assimilation of the Jews into European society. The beautiful Jewess also longs for the realization of her personal feminine energy, although she rarely achieves it. And I think the best example of this, and maybe clearest one I've seen in modern fantasy, is Feyre from ACOTAR. The whole new anti-Semitism was also a big part of like white nationalist movement, and we have the Scrolls of Elders of Zion was a text that was written during this time that demonized Jews and said that they were like, they had a secret society, basically a cabal, and was ruling the world. There's like a lot of like Illuminati things. Like, so if you come to the end of this video and still want to write a story that relies on what I brought up today, maybe ask yourself why do you want to write it? Can it be done without these tropes and stereotypes? Can it be done in like an aware and like safer way that will not harm anybody? A story relying on the trauma of someone else isn't really a good story. Like, what excites you about like the suffering of a people? Because like, it's not just like the past, it's not just fiction. You will most likely have a Jewish reader who will read this and they will feel horrible, or they will see this and they just will feel like disheartened. Or you will have readers who will take what you wrote and like it will become unconscious bias against Jews, and you will just perpetuate this culture of anti-Semitism being accepted in society. So yeah, and I kind of also like wanted to say I want to thank you all for like watching this. This was very long, and there's so many things that I couldn't bring up because I had to make a very condensed video, and I tried to stay on topic to what I've seen in fantasy and sci-fi, but there are a lot of things that I can talk about on topic, and so like, if you have any questions, as I said in the beginning, if you have any questions, if there's a topic you want me to speak about, or if there's a piece of media you want me to analyze, just comment down below and I will check it out. I will think about it, and maybe I will just answer like briefly in the comments, or I will make a new video. This video will be like available somewhat in my script form. I deviated a bit from my script sometimes, but the script will be available in the Google Drive link below.
So yeah, that was all for me. I forgot to make an outro, but yeah, bye, and like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. And well, maybe comment if you want something special. And that was all for me. Have a nice day.